Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Brought to you by the good people at CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. Ants, what's really boring and uneventful in your world this week, Antony?
I have a story out of Chicago that has to do with people responding to incentives. This is something I wasn't aware of till it just showed up in the news. Apparently, it is possible to get an immigration visa into the U.S. if you are a victim of a crime, and there are certain footnotes to that, but if you're a victim of a crime in the U.S., you get fast-tracked for what's called a U visa. So it allows you to stay in the country and subsequently apply for green card, the whole business. And the story of people responding to incentives comes about when Chicago Police Department were tracking down a series of armed robberies in which the robbers apparently well planned out the robberies, but walked away with very little in the way of cash. And so police are scratching their heads about this. Come to find out, they got a break which led them to apprehending one of these robbers. And it turns out that they weren't robbers at all, at least not in the traditional sense of the term. Immigrants who had businesses here hired them to rob the businesses so that the immigrants could apply for the U visa. And the police are kind of left with this strange situation of, once all of this comes to light, these people that they've arrested for the supposed robberies really didn't commit a robbery at all. So you're left with what would almost amount to a victimless crime, except under the heading of, I guess, maybe fraud, where the immigrants are trying to get these visas. But the long and short of it is, as people respond to incentives, government sets up this visa that you can get if you're a victim of crime. And what happens? Some immigrant business owners now have an incentive to actually pay people. They paid them to hold up their businesses at gunpoint.
That's just ridiculous, but I get it. It makes perfect sense to do it.
This goes back to this thing that you and I talk about so frequently, that politicians have this mindset that if they just write the law in a certain way, somehow magically everybody just behaves in the way that the lawmakers had in mind, when in fact that's almost never the case. People have their own incentives, their own goals, and they'll react within the confines of this new law to achieve their goals, not the goals of the policymakers.
I don't know where that leaves me with you talking about goals and aspirations and incentives and what have you. But a news story from Microsoft caught my eye this week, and you as a devoted Windows user should probably take notice of this, although I don't think it will affect you, at least not right away. I suspect it will affect every Windows user in very short order. But apparently Microsoft is releasing a line of computers, the Copilot Plus PC line. Have you heard of this?
No.
Probably you wouldn't have, except for one fascinating feature that it has, a feature called Recall. It's onboard AI service.
Yes, I have heard of Recall.
Yeah, I've heard of this. Recall takes a picture, a screenshot of your screen every 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And puts it in an archive file, so you never have to worry about remembering anything ever again. But here's the thing, your entire computing life will be in one central location on your local machine. It's not to be uploaded to the cloud. It's theoretically going to be on your machine. But I give this about 3 weeks in the wild before it's completely exploited.
Yeah, so it's in effect monitoring you all the time. They say that they don't record things like you logging into your bank account. But, there's all kinds of slips twixt the cup and the lip. Who knows whether that will actually be the case, or there's some bug, or somebody writes some malicious script that enables them to record when you're entering your passwords. But I think it's a horrible, horrible idea. In fact, we lose our minds when employers say something like, well, we're going to monitor your computer usage. Why in God's name someone would do this voluntarily is beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, it's beyond mine too. And I've read up on this as much as one can this far, before it hits the market. And it does seem to me to be the case that this is going to take screenshots no matter what you've got on your screen.
Yeah.
Nothing will be safe. That passwords, right? Just about anything, financial stuff. The only thing I saw that it said it wouldn't take photos of is pornography.
Right. But again, you've got to trust Microsoft that indeed that's what it's going to do. I don't see the benefit here given that huge cost.
Yeah, I don't either. I see a cost that is doubtlessly going to be paid, and it's going to be paid, I think, very quickly. But we'll keep an eye on that as we go along. And this, of course, brings us to the foolishness of the week. And I think this might be the foolishness of all time. It's certainly one of the greatest headlines I've ever read. I'm going to read you the headline, even though it spoils the story a little bit. Mexico, fire breather fights off marauding mariachis in turf war over tips.
I want to see the video.
Well, you might be in luck. You've got a roving gang of mariachis who are milling about playing mariachi music, getting tips, and they become annoyed with a fire breather who is working the crowd, and they proceed to zero in on him and start pummeling him.
I don't think it's wise to pummel someone who breathes fire.
I would just point that out, right? That of all the people you want to pummel, this is probably in that last grouping, because he availed himself of the tools of his trade and started throwing and spitting fire at the mariachis until they were all ablaze, running around in the street, ripping off their clothes and rolling around.
Ripping off their little vests.
That's right. Trying to put the fire out. And I haven't found a video yet, but the picture included with the story that we'll throw in the show notes is worth the price of admission alone. The lesson here, no matter how bad your mariachi band is, don't start with a fire thrower.
I picture the guys with the little vests and the tiny guitars being pissed off at a fire breather. What the hell?
Yeah, no, and he let him have it. He really let him have it.
Oh my God, that's great.
The fire breather did go to the hospital for treatment. The mariachis have not been seen since.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers. What are we talking about this week, James?
Well, Ant, I believe we're going back to that same old chestnut we're always going back to, whether college is worth it. But we've got a new wrinkle on it this time, right? Because we've got some public opinion data that indicates that the vast majority of the American people are coming around to our line of thinking on this pretty quickly. Looks to be about 25% of the public think that college is now worth it.
Is worth it.
Is worth it, 25%.
75% saying either they don't know or it's not worth it. Holy wow.
Let's just say that the vast majority of the American people are having their doubts.
Yeah.
That's actually quite heartening to hear. I think that's good news, all things considered.
Oh, I think it is too. It's about time colleges had their feet held to fire.
Yeah, because let's face it, they really don't. And just to put this in perspective, right, when you're thinking about the big time universities, Princeton, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, they're all between 60 and 65,000 a year. And then when you think of the big time liberal arts colleges, so Williams, Amherst, Pomona, Swarthmore, Wellesley, they're all between 60 and 67,000 a year.
Right.
That doesn't include housing.
Right.
Right. So now you're looking at most of these places at a bill that's approaching about $100,000 a year. You might be able to make the case, look, these are big time schools and you're not really paying for the education, you're paying for the connections. But boy, all the other schools are getting pretty pricey too.
Ran across the numbers for the average four-year private institution, not including room and board, just tuition and fees, is $47,000.
I ran across the average state school, same thing, about $23,000-24,000.
Yeah. Now, if you go back to 1985, the number, and I'm sticking with the four-year private, but, proportionally, it's the same story for the others. The four-year private was around 9,000, maybe close to 10, but below 10,000 in 1985. If you simply adjust for inflation, you should be at 27 today. Instead, they're at 47, 75% more than what inflation adjustments would indicate.
Well, all that administration costs something.
And the quality of education, I can only speak anecdotally here. I can speak from my own experience, but I can also speak from virtually every college professor I've spoken to at multiple institutions. Now, granted, they're all in economics or related fields, say the same thing, that the quality of education they're delivering necessarily is far less than it was. I'll give you my anecdote. My former institution, Duquesne University, which is a middle-of-the-road university, in the early 2000s, and I know this because I can go back and I can look at my class notes, the early 2000s when I was teaching upper level econometrics, so this would have been econometrics to juniors and senior undergrad, the things I was teaching today are only taught, if then, at a master's level. So it was high level stuff. In fact, I advised the students to take linear algebra before they ever took the econometrics. And if they didn't have linear algebra, I'd walk them through some basics, and we were teaching this in proofs and statistical whole thing. The last time I taught this course would have been roughly a year ago. I had to start off with what's a random variable, stuff that you would typically do at a high school class, not an upper level. It is of necessity because if you attempt to teach, and I hear this from professors across the board, if you attempt to teach today at the level that you taught at 20 years ago, you'll lose all the students. And then you'll have the dean coming down on you. What the heck are you doing? Failing out all of these students.
What you've really got are unprepared students entering into college. People point and they say, well, COVID. But no. This trend was happening long before COVID. COVID made it worse, but this was clearly happening beforehand. So much so that I can remember seeing a difference year to year, every year with the students who came in. Now, the students were lousy. But they were lousy because their high school educations were lousy. The stuff, right, the matter that makes up those students is literally no different than the matter that has made up students for generations.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do not blame the students here.
They're no smarter or dumber than students in previous years, but they have been utterly failed when you step back and take a look at it. And, you and I, we visited a lot of high schools, and we were always kind of astonished at the nonsense that they spent their time learning. There are all kinds of crazy things, and people are going to be jumping up and down in their seats saying, yes, DEI, no. They're going to say gender, and no. But all kinds of minutia that would never matter for the rest of their lives, right? But what would matter? Well, the things that would allow them to solve problems. Right. So understanding what an independent variable is, for example, because that has applications all over the place. Is it all that important to understand what happens under the cornea of the human eye?
Right.
Well, maybe, but not as important as being able to solve problems.
Yeah. If you've mastered all that other stuff, then go for it. But don't touch that until you've mastered the other stuff.
That's right. And what we ended up learning was that students weren't able to figure out how to figure out a problem.
Right. You present them with something that's out of context and they're completely lost.
And that's new to the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous when you think about it, but when you're jamming their brains full of disorganized facts that they must remember to score high on an AP exam, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that they're not learning how to think.
I think that is such an important distinction, Jim, that somewhere along the line, we got it in our heads that we have to stuff them with facts, things that are true, rather than giving them the tools to work through stuff. It's that latter thing that they just can't do.
And this is why when I was professoring, I never gave a final exam. Why on earth would I do that? I don't care if you can memorize something for a 2-hour stretch one afternoon. Here's your final paper. Go work it out. Write it up and give it to me when you're done. Let's see how you can think through the things we've discussed for the last 15 weeks. You might be surprised to hear that students didn't love this.
Yeah. And I can't speak to what's going on in high schools. I can hypothesize, but I can tell you from direct experience what's going on in colleges. And that is that the colleges have become addicted to growth. They're building more and more buildings. They're offering more and more stuff and extracurriculars and the gyms and the saunas and whatever. And to pay for that, they need students. and they will do everything they can to get a student in the door, promising them, and I've seen administrators do this, promise students all sorts of, we're not going to make life hard on you and blah, 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 all this stuff. Get them in the door, and once they're in the door, you put pressure on the faculty to, they're not going to say dumb down the courses, but in fact, that's what they mean. Make it easy on the students so the students don't transfer out, don't fail out, and so we get all these tuition dollars.
Right. And what ends up happening is perfectly predictable. We produce bad college graduates the same way we produce bad high school graduates.
Yeah.
Who literally can't do all that much. And then the employers who are looking to hire people to do things can't find them.
Yep.
Well, is it a surprise then that we've been left in a position where the vast majority of the American people don't think college is really worth it anymore? And I've got the exact numbers for you. And this comes from Pew.
Yeah, Pew's pretty reasonable.
We generally take them without the proverbial grain of salt. They do a nice job. 29% college not worth it. 47% worth it, but only without taking out loans. 22% worth it even with loans. Now, that just about magically corresponds to something we've talked about in the past, the value of certain college majors. And roughly 20% of the college majors are in fact worth it, even if you have to take out loans.
Right, yeah.
Right? All the STEM fields, take out all the loans you need, punk, and you're going to be fat, rich, and happy. Don't you worry.
Mm-hmm.
Medieval lesbian poetry, on the other hand, welcome to your barista job.
Yep.
That's about where you are, right? Because it doesn't matter that you have a college degree. It matters that you have something to offer.
And something interesting has happened as well. I wasn't aware of until I was reading the Pew article. The fraction of undergraduates who are female now is above 60%.
It dwarfs the male population.
What's happened to the males?
Well, I think, and I don't give a who gets angry with me. I think we've spent so much time putting our boots on the foreheads of little boys in school that by the time they can make up their own minds whether they want to continue, they don't. I think they just want to get the hell away from it all. People have called this the war against boys and this kind of thing, because you surely remember, I know I do, when we were all wringing our hands that women weren't succeeding academically at the same rate men were.
Right.
Where's the hand wringing now?
Yep.
Now that 2/3 of the graduates are women.
I wondered, and I have no numbers here one way or the other, but as an armchair hypothesis, a major alternative to college is you go into the trades. Is it the case that the trades predominantly tend to be male things simply because of the nature of the work, construction or welding or what have you? Why that might be traditionally male, I'll leave off the table. I have no idea. But the fact that it tends to be traditionally male, I wonder if males have a greater, how should I say, a better alternative to college or more opportunity to alternative than females do.
I think that's probably right, although legally speaking, it's not. Right. Women can apply for those jobs just as easily as men,
right,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you've got a dispositional problem here. Men are disposed towards performing these kinds of tasks. Women are not. That's painting with a broad brush. We've all had female carpenters lurking around. The 1/3 of the paint crew at my house this summer was female. It's and on and on and on. But these things are overwhelmingly male. Overwhelming. I can't remember ever in my life seeing a female car mechanic. Do I know they exist? Sure. But have I ever seen one? No. Female truck drivers, while more now than ever before, not that many of them when it comes right down to it. When you think about the plumbers, the electrician, the handyman who've come into your home, how many have been women?
Right.
None in my experience, right? And, that says something. So I think men, for whatever the reason, have more options that they're inclined to take, while women have the same options that they're disinclined to take. So who knows? I mean, I remember when I was in school as a grade school student, they were teaching women to sew so they could be seamstresses as they taught the young men in wood shop, right? Things like this. There was a distinction even then. There wasn't a single boy in sewing. There wasn't a single girl in wood shop. Could they have been? I guess. It literally never worked out that. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how the gender breakdown shakes out in terms of career earnings when these chickens start coming home to roost, because there is going to be a difference. I'm just not sure where we're going to see it, because if we've got an overwhelming majority of women in college, one would suspect that that would be relatively equally distributed across the majors. And yet, what do I know to be true? The STEM majors are still predominantly male, even though the college is comprised of an overwhelmingly female population. That's going to cause all kinds of aggravation later. People are going to refer to it as sexist that men make more than women, even though a preponderance of the women choose not to major in these highly remunerative majors.
Which is really strange. I've said this before, and I'll underline it again. In my experience, and again, this is anecdotal, but it is my experience of teaching for 20 years, while there are all sorts of exceptions, generally speaking, I found the females to be on average better economic students than the males.
I'll say this about that. My very best students were always women.
Yep.
Always. The vast majority of my very, very, very good students were always male. So I'm telling a slightly different story than you were. Still, this is going to be a problem. All of this is going to be a problem, and you can see it coming from a mile away, and it's worse than it seems. And here's how you know it's going to be a problem. Let me read to you from the report, just a very brief section. And this is under the heading, Views on the Importance of College Differ Widely by Partisanship. It's not too or not at all important to have a four-year college degree in order to get a well-paying job. 50% of Republicans agree. 30% of Democrats agree.
Yeah.
A college degree is less important now than it was 20 years ago, 57 to 43. It's extremely or very likely someone without a four-year college degree can get a well-paying job, 42 to 26%. So Republicans and Democrats are seeing this in very, very different sorts of ways. And if you want to know what we're all going to be yelling at each other in 20 years, here's your answer. When this group of students, when all of the income data is in and we're all analyzing it, how you see that difference will be colored by which of the two parties you identify with.
And all of this, when that data finally becomes available, this entire story will be done.
That's right.
Well, they've got the double whammy of the demographic cliff, the significant fall off in the number of students, combined with this perception. I think it's a well-founded perception that the value of the degree is declining. By the time the data come in, it becomes obvious that all of this is true. In my estimation, anywhere from as low on the good end, a quarter, on the bad end, a half of colleges that exist today will not exist in 20 years.
I would have flinched at that prediction if I didn't see the demographics so clearly. There just aren't as many young people coming through the ranks. And when they get to the age where they have to make a decision, they don't think college is worth what it costs anymore.
Yep.
So it is, in fact, a double whammy. And I don't see how a number of schools are going to see their way through this.
And there's this weird phenomenon that's going on, seems to be going on across the board in academia, that administrators know this demographic cliff is coming. And yet they're across the board, they're building more dorms, they're expanding, as if they believe that, yeah, we're going to lose a quarter to a half of colleges, but it's going to be somebody else, and the remainder of their students are going to come to me. Well, that's true for some of them. It's not true for all of them.
I think that's right. And I think, you're going to end up looking over the landscape, and specialty schools that serve real niche communities, probably going to be fine because those niche communities exist regardless. State schools, going to be fine because if you're looking for an actual value, that's the only place you can find them at this point if you're a student.
Right.
And then the gigantic schools that you've already heard of, the ones I mentioned at the top of the episode, they're going to be around too. But your alma mater, right, a place I taught at for a while, St. Vincent College, and all the other schools just like it, those 1,400 to 2,000 student liberal arts colleges.
And there's a ton of them.
And there are, and there are not going to be a ton of them by the time this shakes out.
Yep.
Are they all going to disappear? No, but they're all in danger. They don't have endowments, right? There's nothing to see them through the collapse in the market that they serve. And that's going to be a real problem. But if you take a step back, and take a look at everything we've said thus far, it could be boiled down to a sentence. The market speaks.
Yeah. The market has decided that this thing just is not worth its price.
It's ridiculous. My children have thanked me for not letting them go to expensive schools. Imagine that. Who would have thought of that 20 years ago?
Well, I wonder, now that we're talking about, I wonder if a possible outcome is you combine what's happening now with colleges and the decline in the quality of the education, combine that with what has been going on for a long time with public schooling and the decline there. I wonder if we end up in a strange situation where a bunch of what are now four-year private colleges in effect become prep schools. You've gone through high school and you didn't learn anything, come here and we'll complete what 30 years ago would have been a high school education.
I want to brush that aside with the back of my hand, and I know better. That probably will happen. And there probably is a market out there to sustain that sort of nonsense. Of course, the people who would pay for it probably didn't send their children to half public schools.
Right, yeah.
My prediction, such that it is that a number of these small liberal arts colleges are going to be gobbled up by state schools and kind of kept around as de facto honors colleges that have their own campuses. Because who else would have the resources to run them? And, you start getting into these sorts of things. But the real question that we've got is, now that people are starting to turn away from college entirely, which we predicted 15 years ago, what happens in the labor market next? Because we all saw how the trades dwindled, right? And it got to be the case that if you were willing to become a plumber, an electrician, an auto mechanic, you could actually make a small fortune.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes a medium or a large fortune if you were willing to go into business doing it for yourself. All right, what happens now when we approach an equilibrium in that market where there's as many people going in to fill the slots as there are slots, right? When you don't have to wait 3 weeks to get a plumber for an emergency plumbing situation in your house, those wages will start to go down again. Because that's how this works. Does that send people back to college? I don't think so, because there's nothing that's going to send those wages up.
Right. That doesn't improve the value of college. Yeah.
It does not, right? And you see how difficult this is going to be to predict and then to live with. The easy part is over. What to predict next? Very difficult. Very difficult. I wonder if I were the parent of a 10-year-old right now, what would I be thinking? What do we do with Junior in 8 years when it's time? I could have answered that question at any point in the past relatively easily. I don't think that's an easy question to answer anymore. So when people complain about not having a lot of options, I think that's always been a load of nonsense, frankly. There have always been lots of good options. Are there any good options right now? Apart from going to college and majoring in a STEM field, I don't know that there are any. A lot of people aren't equipped to do that.
One of the saving graces here is entrepreneurship. It might be the case that you get entrepreneurs coming together and kicking the whole accreditation nonsense in the teeth and saying, I'm going to start a quality college. If it doesn't rise to the level of accreditation for the accrediting bodies, I don't care, because the fact is the institutions they accredit, we've demonstrated, are delivering degrees that have no value. So let's just deliver a product that is such high quality that people are actually willing to pay top dollar for it.
If there is a multi-billionaire out there considering such a thing, all I can say is give us a call.
Yeah.
We'd be happy to help you out. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
All of this bothers me enough, but then you combine it with the specter of student loan forgiveness. And my God, you'll have a problem where not only is higher education spitting out degrees that have no value. Now, if we turn around and say, well, we're going to forgive these student loans because the students can't earn enough to pay for the things, that just encourages the colleges to continue spitting out degrees of no value.
And as we have said, incentives matter.
Yeah, and if you want an example of that, I give you just off the top of my head, Amtrak, the post office, any government-sponsored entity where the less quality they deliver, the greater the argument they have to go before Congress and say, well, the problem is you haven't given us enough money.
And here I am still waiting for my mortgage to be forgiven.
Right, yeah.
But here's the thing, you just left. There isn't a single argument in favor of forgiving student loans that doesn't equally apply to forgiving my mortgage.
Right.
And we all know that forgiving my mortgage is asinine. Because of course it is. I bought a house. I signed the paper. I took the money. Oh, wait. So I don't know where all of this is going to shake out, but Pew Research gives us yet another arrow in our quiver to point at the powers that be in the education space. And we can say, I think, without doubt whatsoever, that their house of cards is now collapsing. It's already started to happen. What it looks like by the time it's done collapsing, I don't know, but it's not going to look much like it looks right now. And that's probably a good thing.
I think it's going to be a really good thing.
And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.